Today, we're diving into one of the most decisive, but honestly, often overlooked battles of World War I. This is the story of the Battle of Galicia, a massive clash that pretty much sealed an empire's fate in the very first month of the war. So, get this. It sounds like a total paradox, right? How does an army score two huge victories, capture tens of thousands of prisoners, and then have its entire front just completely collapsed into a chaotic rout? Well, that's the big mystery we're going to unpack here. We're going to figure out exactly how such an incredible victory spiraled into a total catastrophe. All right, let's set the scene. It's August 1914. The war has just kicked off, and out on the massive Eastern Front, you've got two colossal empires gearing up for a fight. In one corner, you had the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and in the other, the gigantic Russian Empire. And their armies are all heading toward this one region, Galicia, which is basically a powder keg just waiting to explode. So you have two completely different game plans here. The Austrian commander, a guy named Konrad von Hotzendorf, he figured his only real shot against the much larger Russian army was to go for a bold knockout punch right at the start. His plan was to hit him hard and fast up north, before Russia could even get all its troops to the front. But on the Russian side, their commander, Nikolai Ivanov, was basically expecting this. He was almost baiting them into it, all while getting ready to launch his own massive counterattack from the south. And at first, man, it looked like Conrad's gamble was a stroke of genius. The opening phase of the battle goes exactly the way he drew it up. His armies in the north start pushing forward, and they start winning big. First up is the Battle of Krasnik. The Austro-Hungarian First Army just smashes into the Russian Fourth Army, sending them reeling backward. And they managed to bag 6,000 prisoners in the process. I mean, this is a picture-perfect victory, a fantastic start for Austria-Hungary. And the good news just keeps on coming for them. Right after that first win, their Fourth Army hits the Russian Fifth Army at Komarov. They hit him hard, and this time they capture a staggering 20,000 more prisoners. So if you're sitting back at Austrian headquarters, you're probably thinking, we've got this. The plan is working to perfection. But, and this is a huge but, while the Austrians were popping champagne corks over their victories in the north, they were completely oblivious to the massive storm that was brewing down on their southern flank. And this is where the whole thing takes a very dramatic and very fatal turn. So, remember that Russian plan to counterattack? Well, while the Austrians were distracted, Ivanov made his move. With all eyes on the north, his armies, led by some very capable generals named Brusilov and Ruzsky, unleashed a powerful offensive in the south. In what was called the Battle of Gnila Lipa, they just completely steamrolled the unprepared Austro-Hungarian forces there. And this quote from General Alexei Brusilov, who would become one of Russia's most famous commanders, it just says it all. He's basically saying, yeah, we took some hits, but you should have seen what we did to them. And he was right. The southern Austrian wing wasn't just beaten, it was being absolutely shattered. So now, faced with a total disaster in the south, the Austrian commander, Konrad, has to make a decision. On paper, it seems like the logical thing to do, but it's the very decision that's going to lead to his entire front line completely unraveling. Okay, so here's how it all went down. Konrad panics and starts pulling troops from his victorious armies in the north to rush them south and plug the holes. But what does that do? It leaves his northern front dangerously weak. And the Russians, they spotted this weakness immediately. And get this, the very same Russian Fifth Army that had just been defeated at Komarov turns right around and slams into that now undermanned Austrian line. The result was a total catastrophic collapse. The line just broke and the Russians swept in and captured the key city of Lemberg. And just like that, the battle was over. In just a few weeks, what looked like a brilliant Austrian triumph had turned into one of the most lopsided and disastrous defeats of the war. And its consequences would haunt the empire right up until its final days. I mean, just look at the numbers here. They tell a really brutal story. The Austro-Hungarian army suffered over 324,000 casualties. The Russians, 225,000. For an army that was already smaller and not as well equipped, those were just staggering losses they could never hope to replace. And as if that wasn't bad enough, on top of all the dead and wounded, a mind-boggling 100,000 Austro-Hungarian soldiers were taken prisoner. That's like an entire army's worth of men, just wiped off the map. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a complete annihilation. So, what did all this mean for the rest of the war? Well, the battle basically broke the back of the Austro-Hungarian army. They lost a huge chunk of their experienced officers and NCOs, the sergeants and corporals who were the real backbone of any military. The Russians pushed forward 100 miles deep into the mountains, and they even surrounded the key fortress of Przemyśl. The bottom line is this: in just 1 month, Austria-Hungary lost nearly half of its entire fighting force on the Eastern Front. From this point on, they would be dangerously dependent on Germany just to stay in the war. And all of that leaves us with one pretty stark question. The Battle of Galicia was an absolute catastrophe, one the empire never truly recovered from. It was a fatal pivot, a strategic blunder born from early success that led directly to a disaster, and it completely reshaped the course of the war in the East.